Welcome to MetaPod, the podcast where we discuss operational execs and organizations that make and move stuff, and our common headaches, digital transformation, the forever labor shortage, and doing more with less. And now, the host of MetaPod, Ron Crabtree.
So it's Ron Crabtree here, your host of MetaPod, and we're here with a special episode to focus in on some of the very best strategies that we should be using in industry to deal with, I'll call it the tariff catastrophe going on in North America and well beyond. And here we're actually kicking off a series of short podcasts with different experts that'll come in talking about very specific strategies. But we have Dennis Schneider here, a long-term meta expert, somebody I've known well. He and I have done business together in other fashions. And he's going to be sharing in this episode some of the key concepts around the bigger organizational strategy that we need to be thinking about to cope with tariffs and, frankly, many other challenges that tangible goods-oriented firms are involved with. And then this will be a fairly short one. We're going to have a whole series of at least 4 or 5 more episodes where we'll have different experts coming in to talk about things like how do you choose the best immediate options to get after some of these challenges being driven by, tariff and trade policy changes? How do we directly address those changes in terms of how do we set those classifications correctly to mitigate the impacts of tariffs? And worse, stop paying tariffs twice, which is happening to some companies. There'll be another expert talking about a digital twin strategy, about how you go about actually modeling your supply chain to decide on your best detail future supply sourcing types of decisions. And then, assuming you're going to move stuff, we'll have a different expert talking about if you're going to have, move your suppliers tooling or relocate plants or whatever the case may be, how do you make that decision? And then how do you do it right the first time? So now we're going to pivot back. Dennis, tell us a little bit about you.
Good day to everybody. Hi, I'm Dennis Schneider. I'm a long-term senior level industrial manager. Worked in virtually every part of the world and just about every type of industry there is. Lived abroad. I've had as many as 30 different facilities around the world. So a lot of goods moving to and from. So it gives you a unique perspective about the worlds of tariffs and trade policies and supply chains disruption. So over the years, you learn to live with those, manage them, but also learn some insights how to hopefully, when they happen, and they will happen, to be able to quickly and effectively manage the change. So glad to share my insight with everyone.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to what Dennis is going to share with us because, we hear this, people talking about, what are you doing about tariffs? And it's like very, very narrow focus. It's just dealing with the tariff problem, but tariffs are just one of many things that we have to be really good at coping with. And it should be the catalyst for forcing us to think a lot more carefully about longer term strategy and stuff like that. So we're going to have Dennis kind of take this a little bit of the high road, just talking about as an organization, as an enterprise, how do you go after this? So Dennis, I'll let you kind of take it from there and share some of your thoughts and recommendations.
Well, over the last probably 4 to 6 weeks, like everybody else, a lot of conversations about trade policies and tariffs, what we should do. Oh my God, what can we do? All those realm of things, right? And it's really interesting because the tones of the conversations range from panic to more insightful. And, it depends on the conversation. And so, it's always good to provide some insight, share some experiences. One of the things that I really like to do is, I like to ask questions. I like to frame it back to people. I usually ask 2 leading questions to people in these conversations. First is, do you really understand your supply chain costs, total costs? And the next question is, do you have a strategic plan for your supply chain? And what you find is that everybody says yes immediately. Okay. And I kind of, snicker to myself, but then, I said, okay, well, let's just dig into that a little bit, So we talked a little bit about total cost. And I said, okay, do you have a good total cost? Do you feel comfortable with those costs? And they range from, yes. And as I start probe a little bit, they get a little bit more squeamish, right? Okay, so I said, let me ask a couple questions, follow-up questions. And I said, does it include things like inventory carrying costs, import duties, cost of stockouts, customer penalties for late delivery, premium freight costs, incoming, receiving inspection, put away costs, supplier relationship management, the overall lead time? Does it include all things for that? And in most cases, the conversation gets pretty quiet. Okay. The
Yeah,
answer
that
is
that's quite
no.
real fast then, because that sounds a lot like the same conversation you would have around the total cost of quality if you're dealing with quality. "Oh, I have to understand your total cost of quality." And they'll go, sure." I said, "Well, wait a minute. Can you really tell me what your cost of good quality is?" In other words, you understand the cost of poor quality, right? Rejects, rework, customer complaints, make goods. But then what about all the money you spend just to try to be in control of your quality with, the cost of salaries and certifications and blah, blah, blah. So what you're suggesting is it's the same mentality of understanding truly what the actual, I'll call it landed and out the door cost is for all the inbound. Is that what you're suggesting?
Absolutely. It's all encompassing cost. And it's interesting when you have that conversation, what you end up finding is, a couple of them will have picked off pieces of this, but vast majority have not. And so then you start having a question about, well, can you get that data? Oh my gosh, that'd be so difficult. I said, now what pieces of that do you not have? And are they not resident someplace in your organization? Well, yeah, it would be finance and marketing, IT, whatever, accounts payable. I said, so for the vast majority of these, you got the data. It's just somewhere's in your organization. Yes. Good. Well, that's a good place to be, right? Because you control it. I said, now, how difficult would it be to get that? And then you get a little different conversation. Well, I'd have to go here. I said, but given the enormous visibility of tariffs, trade costs, all these things, is it now not a great time to acquire those? Oh, I think so. I think now would be a good time. I said, I would think that would be a great time. Um, so I said, but you gotta understand, here's your challenge. When you don't have that information, you're missing half the algorithm. When you're making the decision, boy, it's really difficult to make a high quality decision when you're missing half the data points. So I said, the sooner you can get that information, the sooner you understand the cost. And when these challenges pop up, and they will on an ongoing basis for forever, you can plug those in and quickly model what the impact is, and then also model what the cost of the alternative impacts would be if you say, I got to change this, I want to change this. I said, you now have data. Okay. And I said, it's a great tool to communicate when you have data. I said, I can see you can see yourself get in a meeting with the CEO or whatever, board members, and they're asking you questions and you don't have data. Okay. It's usually not a pleasant conversation, right? And they said, yeah, it's really unpleasant. I said, yeah, that's been my case too, right? Lack of data usually doesn't help you. Okay. So they work through that. I said, but the sooner you can do that, the better shape you are to move forward. Okay. Decisively. Okay. So then the next question I asked them, I said, strategic plan. Do you have a strategic plan for your supply chain? And about a third of them say no, and about 2/3 of them say yes. And I kind of like, okay, let's dig a little deeper, right? I said, for those who say no, I say, why don't you have one? Ah, we're too small. We're not sophisticated. Okay, our business changes too much. We just got bought by a company, right? And or no one has asked us to do it. Okay, that's fair. I mean, I can understand that. Then for those who say, yes, we got one, I ask them, is it formal? Is it published? Is it something that you have ready, available, and shared? And the answer usually is, well, it's more informal than formal. Okay. Or we have a commodity strategy, for a couple commodities. Let's say it's steel, castings, plastics, resin, something, right? But not everything. So I said, you got the beginning of one. Yes. Or we got one that's, it's old. It's been done like 10 years ago and the people that did it are no longer here. Or
That begs a question, if I may. You're really bringing up an important point here. In your experience for organizations that are really good at maintaining a good supply plan, right? And this is not just supply chain. It's really a whole corporate strategy for the end-to-end flow of goods and services for years to come. How often should that be done? Completely rinsed for a complete redo, or do you see that as more like, monthly, quarterly, semi-annual? How often should it really get a careful going through and documented with the data you're talking about?
great question. I think some of the best companies I've been associated with, either as working for them or doing some work for, typically do a strategic plan. Strategic plan is typically like a 3 to 5 year snapshot, right?
All right.
And so they're looking at that. It's not something that's done, you know, monthly, quarterly, unless there's something dramatic, maybe it's a major acquisition or, you're going to go into a new market or something. It's not something I think is done on a frequent basis, near term. It's more of a longer term because, like business strategies typically are a 3 to 5 year outlooking what we want to do in 3 to 5 years.
Right.
And I think the supply chain strategy has to be a key element of that. So it should mirror in time and scope what that is.
All right. But how often should they be refreshed? Particularly in supply chain, because, business strategy, it could take 2 years to get new products brought to market. Yeah. Right. And you got to align your supply chain to support that. But then you've got things that are happening that should force you on some sort of an interval to go back and question.
Oh, absolutely it does. I mean, there's major charismatic events that happen in a business. Okay. Could be, anything from, price of oil triples or something, right? I mean, these are, we're full of supply chain challenges in this business. They happen every year, whatever, different areas, but some are more once in a lifetime type things, and they're going to force you to change stuff. But in the absence of those, I think it's probably every couple of years you got to refresh it. But I think every year, if you do a plan, you do your annual plan, you got to go back and look at it and say, has anything fundamentally changed? Okay.
Got it.
Did the business strategy change? Did the supply chain base change? Did the commodities change? Whatever. Something, that fundamentally turns it upside down. You have to look at it. Okay. But I would say I'm not a big fan of doing those rapid fire because then they become more of an annual than a strategic, right? And like you said, many of these changes aren't quick. They're not inexpensive. You're going to move your supply chain from one part of the world to the other.
Well, that's not
do something. It's not cheap. It's not inexpensive. It's not quick. So they have to be well thought out. Okay.
Agree. Thank you.
Okay. In terms of the other things about a supply strategy is, how does it tie to the business strategy? The guys that I talked to, guys and gals that said they got one, I said, great, I love it. Now, how does it tie to the business strategy? And they usually then, it gets a little bit fuzzy in the answers. And they ask me questions. Well, what's that look like? And I said, well, let me tell you an example. I said, a real life example that I dealt with. I said, I was the president and COO of a large multinational, and we were based in North America primarily, but we sold globally. Okay. And what was happening is we were starting to see regional players come into the market and in those emerging markets. And frankly, we're very difficult to deal with. And so we looked at it, from a long-term strategy and said, hey, we got to do something different. We can't make everything here and ship it there. Takes too long, cost, there's too many issues with currencies, whatever, right? All these things that are headwinds. And so we set out and created a 5-year plan that says we're going to change our supply chain to support us growing into now those emerging markets. And so what we said was we got to change it dramatically. So what we came up with, what we called at that time, the 80-80 strategy. What does that stand for? 80% of it was we were going to make the products in the region we sold it. And we were going to source 80% of our goods and services from the region that we made it in. Pretty simple.
That circumvents this whole trade policy problem, doesn't it?
Well, yeah. What it says, you change it. And I can, for those who have done something like this, I remember presenting that to the board of directors of this, multi-billion-dollar company, and they looked at you like, what? And then you explain it to them, and it's pretty logical, right? Of course, then the questions are how you going to do it, how you going to manage it, and all those fun things. It goes from being on a nice PowerPoint to you have to go make it work. But the real key was it supported the business strategy. We were going to grow 30% of our revenue into these emerging markets, and by doing this, we were able to do that. We were able to take our costs down. We increased our gross margin by 5%, and we supported revenue growth on a 20% CAGR, and it was almost all out of North America. And so, the sales and marketing guys were happy. Engineering was happy because they were, able to do things. And so the supply chain strategy was a glove fit into the business strategy. And so it wasn't like siloed, it was integrated.
Exactly. I love it.
And got everybody excited because they're all like, oh yeah, I can now point to where I fit, right? When you're telling a supplier or a purchasing person or a supply chain person why we want to do this, they can definitely make a linkage between what you're asking them to do and what the business needs are. Worked out pretty so.
Perfect. So Dennis, why don't you get us into a conclusion then and kind of tie all this together with your final thoughts around, how do you go through this?
I think the final thoughts is let's not consider this tariff and trade policy issues that we're going through as unique. They might change the names, but there's always things like this. Those of us who had a few cycles of learning along the way here know that there will be other ones. There'll be currency, there'll be wars, there'll be commodity supply disruptions, whatever. 18 months ago, you couldn't get boats from China to the West Coast and couldn't get it unloaded on the West Coast to get it to the Midwest, right? All those disruptions. And so you look at those and you say, listen, this is not unique. Okay. This situation is part of a bigger overall business strategy. So what we're saying here is understand your costs, your total costs. So you can go through and model what the event is costing us, what our alternatives are, what they would cost us, so you can make a data-driven decision as to what the impact, what the options are. And finally, have a strategy. Okay. If you don't have a strategy, I call strategy to the guys I work with, I call it magnetic north. Okay. You're walking through the forest. It's easy to get lost. You pull out your compass and you find out which direction's north, right? Your strategy should be your magnetic north. Okay. And so you got to have that. So when these disruptions happen, and they will, you're able to pull back and look at it more holistically. What's the long-term strategy here? So you're not doing knee-jerk type things, just because you got a boss who wants you to do this. It may or may not be the right thing to do long-term. Okay. So be able to go back to your leadership teams and basically tie all this together in a data-driven way that ties into a long-term strategy. If you can do that, you'll be able to communicate effectively. And I will tell you, I think your stress levels will go down dramatically. Okay.
Great stuff. Thank you, Dennis. Well, you opened up a lot of great ideas here, and I'm guessing folks that want to get in touch with you to learn more or pick your brain or whatever. How do people get in touch with you, Dennis?
Okay. Well, let me give you an email address, DS Dennis S as in Schneider, SCHNEIDER group, GROUP @gmail.com, or you can call me, area code 701 799-4737. Be glad to talk to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Dennis. I'm glad you could join me.
You're welcome. Best
All
wishes.
right. Well, awesome. So thanks for joining us for this episode, this special episode of MetaPod. Remember, we've got, a series of other topics coming up, like choosing the best options around, how do you actually react to those policy changes, tariffs or what have you. Or if you got to reclassify, how do you go about doing that? What's the right way to go at mitigating the tariff impacts and stopping even paying twice in some cases? How to actually in a detailed fashion go after that digital twin strategy. That's what Dennis is alluding to, having the data and the ability to model it. That's easy to say and a lot of hard work to do to actually do it. And then if you are going to make the move, how do you make the right decision and actually do it right the first time? So be sure to be sure to share MetaPod, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining MetaPod. For requests on topics or to ask questions, you can connect with Ron Crabtree 3 ways: via email at metapod@metaexperts.com, via LinkedIn, or by calling him directly at 734-425-1455, extension 103. Lastly, if you love the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. We truly appreciate all your support.